Hello, my friends, and welcome to FISHTORY. I'm Alexander Williamson, of course, and today we are talking about the circle of life. Don't sue me, Disney, please. But we're talking about the circle of life in your aquarium. And your aquarium, sadly, does have a life cycle that ends. And you can do things to nudge it along. You can have a nature-style aquarium where it's very hands-off. You're not doing a lot of water changes. You have a holistic-style ecosystem with microscopic and macroscopic, so microscopic organisms, bacteria, fungi, all that, and food that the fish are eating, algae that the fish are eating, and plants that are growing, and you're trimming them and you're replanting them and giving them to friends or selling them on the side to make a little bit of money, and your fish are breeding and you're moving your fish around. But at a certain size of fish, a certain size of population, and at a certain size of plant, it cannot be contained in our ecosystem. And depending on how we set it up and how we plan it, it all has a limit. Now, I've had aquariums that are high-tech aquariums with CO2, and I've run those for 7-8 years right into the ground until they're not producing anything that is beautiful. They're not even growing plants other than like hornwort and very basic boggy kind of plants. I've also set up tanks thinking I want this to last a decade without me having to put much of anything other than maybe some root tabs in every 3 years or so. And there's ways to do that. There's, Father Fish and Diane Wallstead and me and Lucas Bretz and lots of different methods out there that are very interesting and very different also. But what I want to talk to you about in this video is what I've witnessed in years of fish keeping, altogether over 25 years of fish keeping, but more specifically what I've seen in the last 10 years continuously keeping lots of tanks with lots of plants. So we're talking about planted tanks with fish. A lot of them are community tanks, and they're set up so that I get maximum enjoyment when the plants are flourishing, when the moss has sculpted itself to the rocks or to the log or the wood that I put in there, when the rocks have a biofilm on them that the hillstream loaches or gobies are able to eat, and then they're able to spawn and reproduce. When your substrate is actually converting your nitrates into nitrites and then into ammonia, the complete reverse of the oxygenated part of the cycle that's in an oxygenated tank, you can get into the anoxic cycle in the substrate. And in this video, I want to talk to you about the things that I've witnessed keeping these nature-style aquariums, and honestly tell you, does it look like an ADA competition level aquascape? When does an aquarium hit its stride? When are the fish breeding best? When are the plants breeding best? When is the substrate at its best for productive plants? And when does it kind of hit at a plateau? And it may look great, it may be low maintenance for a year or two, and then things kind of taper off and you start needing to put root tabs in maybe once a year, then twice a year, then every 3 months. Then you got to add CO2 and, or you got to take out lots of substrate because your substrate's gotten so deep and so thick that it's just a big muddy level that doesn't smell so good. So let's talk about how the keeping of these nature aquariums can unfold and the way I've seen it unfold in my own care through a number of different tanks. And while I chat with you guys about this, I will be showing you video, new and old, of aquariums in that stage so that you can get an idea, because you know what my face looks like, but you can get an idea what I'm talking about when I say an aquascape style tank versus a nature or biotope tank versus a deep substrate or gravel tank with plants, and everything in between. And when certain problems start to arise, when all that effort we put in that care, when it starts to no longer be returned to us, when the time and energy we put in is no longer equal to the beauty and the satisfaction or happiness or output, if it's for money or for breeding fish or plants, that we are expecting. And when it's time to call lights out and pull the plug, because there's no shame in it. When you run a tank for years, you're gonna feel attached. And it is hard to say goodbye to that tank. And it's hard to know when you're done and when you should step away. And oftentimes we keep doing it and our enjoyment just kind of goes slowly downhill until we look back and we realize the last year or two, we should have reset long ago and we could have had a lot more fun with the hobby. So let's jump into all of that right now. And I hope you enjoy. Don't don't forget to like and comment down below with what you guys think about what I have to say today. Alright, so all aquariums have a life cycle. You set them up, and if you're like me, you may have a lasagna style substrate, a deep substrate, you may just have gravel with sand on top. Whatever it may be, if you're going to put plants in it, you're going to need nutrients in that substrate. And that takes some time to charge up if you're not adding it at the beginning. But for this video, let's pretend like we're using an aqua soil or root tabs or liquid fertilizer, and right from the start we have that added, and so the plants are ready to start growing. We're talking about a planted tank and the life cycle, and just like this tank here, which you can check out my video called Lasagna Substrates and how to do them. There's a 15-minute version and there's a 45-minute version. The 45-minute version has all the science. The other one is just a how-to video. But basically, this is just a starter. It's not my special method. It's not anyone's particular method. It's just how to set up an aquarium with various substrate layers so that it will last a good 4 to 5 or 6 years if you treat it nicely and maintain it with, you know, a bare minimum of maintenance. It's kind of an easy set it and forget it aquarium. But here, as we watch, you know, the aquarium grow and age, there are certain things that happen that we can see. So the complexity of the microorganisms, that increases over time. Whether it's because plants are introduced and they have snail eggs, or they have baby ostracods or seed shrimp on them. Every few months you may add more and more and more end up in your aquarium. Same with the bacteria. Starting at the beginning, there's no fish waste for them to eat, but as there are more elements, be it fish waste or carbon or nitrogen or whatever it may be, even bacteria or fungus that is eaten by other bacteria or fungus, and then single cell organisms and other creatures like that, it gets more and more complex, and the food chain builds upon itself as these things make their way into our aquarium. And naturally, these bacterias, these little organisms, literally fly in from the breeze and from the hardscape and plants and fish that we put in our tanks. Some things are parasites, or they're in the gut of the fish, and they go on to live and be a happy, healthy part of the aquarium. Also, when we treat with medications, you can knock this all back a step. You can reduce the complexity of diversity of your ecosystem. But the same is true as that kind of grows. It's a bell curve. So it grows slowly, and when you get to a year or 2 or 3 years, it kind of maximizes out. And then when you get to 4 or 5 years, you need to start either taking out a lot of the waste and bioorganic debris from years of plants, and the mulm that once was being helpful and, you know, develops into a nutrient layer for your new plants to grow off of and for your bacteria to flourish in, it becomes so thick that it starts to overtake your fish's ecosystem, and soon the fish don't have as much room. And this ecosystem, our aquarium, is not so much a wild natural replica of a lake or river in the sense of where we want to see it, the beautiful productive plants and animals part, but rather the substrate just gets thicker and thicker, muddier and murkier. And while this is a growth in diversity, after a while it kind of tops out, and soon your fish can't live. The oxygen starts to go down, and you hit things like eutrophication, where the oxygen's low, the nitrogen's getting high. And so you have to know how you're taking care of your aquarium to kind of nudge these things along. Likewise, you could feed a diet of food that's always adding nutrients for the plants to grow, and then you trim the plants, and that's how you're removing some of the waste. But in these substrates, as they grow, you're going to get cyanobacteria, you're going to get archaea, you're going to get fungi, you're going to get all sorts of things. And as these plant roots reach down and grow, that sub-oxygen region, which we call the anoxic region, down below where the water has oxygen, starts to grow a completely different way. And I mentioned this briefly, I have lots of other videos on this, but the anoxic zone actually takes the waste, the ammonia, and it does the complete opposite of our natural aquarium cycle. So instead of going from the natural taking ammonia, turning into nitrites, then into nitrates with the next step of bacteria, it actually takes your nitrates, turns them into nitrites, and then stores it in either clay or ions and other debris of material and mulm, clay and the like, in the aqua soil. And then the roots reach down and they extract it from that as ammonia, because plants actually prefer direct ammonia. But after a while, either this gets tapped out, or you get such a thick layer of mulm and algae, and your species diversity starts to kind of wobble in that you've used medications to treat things over time, and maybe that killed a few bacteria types, and maybe that killed a few fungi types. Maybe you use methylene blue or something for baby fish or for eggs. Maybe you did a big water change or had a pH swing or something, and it wiped out certain things. So over time, a few things get knocked out of the ecosystem, and it's very easy to end up with an aquarium that has only a handful of diverse little creatures going on. So let's talk about this exact pattern that I tend to see. And you know, I've done high-tech tanks, I've done these deep substrate tanks, I've done nature tanks where you don't even have a filter on them. They all kind of age the same way, they just do it at different speeds. So the tank tends to go from 1 to 4 months. It starts out kind of picture perfect. Whether you're running CO2 and you're growing a carpeting grass like this one here, and your fish are all happy, first you cycle the tank, takes a week or two, or you jump cycle the tank. Then the bacteria starts to grow in like this. Your aqua soil is still spherical, and or your dirt is still rich in nutrients, and your bacteria starts to grow in and kind of grow to however many fish you have, and to handle that on your filter media. And that whole process takes a few months. Then your plants start growing. You kind of dial in what it needs nutrient-wise and what your fish need for food-wise, whether they're going to eat what's in the tank microscopically, or whether you're adding food. It could be anywhere from all in the tank to all added. It's really up to you and the kinds of fish and species you're keeping. And then also you've got your shrimp, your snails, all that, and you can start building all that. And it's really about 3 or 4 months that kind of hits its stride. And usually you'll get your first algae bloom. It's kind of a christening in the hobby. You'll get your first big algae bloom or cyanobacteria bloom. You'll learn to work through that. There's lots of videos out there on how to work through that. I prefer not to use chemicals and to correct the underlying problem, but do as you see fit. Then at around 12 to 18 months, so a year and a half, everything's looking pretty good, but you start seeing more and more algae, more and more cyanobacteria, and your substrate starts to stratify. So it goes from those perfect round spheres, if you're using aqua soil, or from structured dirt with clay and little clumps and things and bits of organic debris, to this kind of layer of mulm that's just kind of there, and all the different minerals and things start to separate out. And somewhere between 12 months and 24 months, you'll actually oftentimes see a rust line, or bacteria that eats the iron in the water and lives off of it, and then dies, and then lives off of it, and then dies, and over and over and over, until it actually makes a line right where that mineral is oxidized. Below that, you can see where cyanobacteria is living in your substrate, and this is kind of your peak diversity in your aquarium. You've also got all the snails and hitchhikers in there, and at about 2 years to 4 years, everything can go pretty well. Maybe you add root tabs once a year. You're doing a little bit of, fertilizer additive here and there. But for the most part, this is peak production of plants. Your fish can breed the best, and the tank looks good. But over time, you start building up debris and mulm, and the snails and things they break down all the stuff like they're supposed to, but they start making a whole lot of this debris. And your plants, where once you used to be able to grow delicate plants and things, now you start realizing a lot of floating plants are growing, and the soil might be suboptimal, and you can't even grow the plants that you expected to anymore. And as we get into that 36 to 48 months, you really hit a plateau that you need to help it along by adding either root tabs or topping off the aqua soil or maybe recapping it. There's a number of things you can do, but at the end, the tank ends up with kind of an old tank syndrome, and your anoxic layer no longer functions the way it should because there's not enough life above doing its thing, because we don't have the size of a huge ecosystem to work with. And we're limited by our walls on our glass box. So then algae starts growing, and you start getting into more monocultures growing, where you used to have a diversity of algae, a diversity of little microorganisms and things, and now you're getting worms, you're getting paramecium, you're getting the sort of pest critters, scuds and things like that, and they're even outnumbering the beneficial ones. And the nutrients are also drained from your soil unless you keep adding them or keep liquid dosing fertilizer daily. And you can nudge it along kind of forever if you want to do the work. But here is where I bow out, somewhere between 4 and 6 years, depending on how intense you were extracting nutrients from your system in the form of plant material and baby fish, and how good you want it to look. You may want to call it a day at 3 years, because that's as far as the aquascape needs to grow to look the way you wanted it to. But wherever it may be, it's up to you where you should call it a day. Oh, you made it to the end. Thank you so much, my friend. Thanks for watching and liking and subscribing and clicking in the comments and typing and all the other stuff you do all the time to make this community awesome. Thanks, guys. I hope that you are having a great day. I hope if it's not such a great day, that maybe it's getting a little bit better, or it does get a whole lot better. And hopefully I'll see you in the Discord or in the comments below. Come join us, chat about the hobby, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. As always, take care, much love, and I'll see you guys next time.